My perfect marriage was a lie, the shocking truth that changed everything. My life was everything I had ever dreamed of. I had the job, the house, and most importantly, Linda, the woman I'd married 4 years ago. I remember the day we met like it was yesterday. Both of us standing in the coffee line at our university's library, laughing over a book we both had just finished. I had always admired her intelligence. But her laugh? It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. It was the kind of laugh that made me feel like everything was going to be okay, even when I knew it wasn't. She was my best friend, my confidant, and to me, my world. It seemed impossible to think that anything could go wrong. Our connection was one of those rare things that people look for their entire lives. I believed we had it all, the perfect relationship, the perfect future. But it didn't stay perfect forever. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The changes were small, almost unnoticeable. Linda, once full of life and always involved in our plans, started pulling away. She'd come home late more often. Her responses to my questions felt like rehearsed lines, and our conversations, which used to flow effortlessly, felt strained. There was one night, a week after we'd returned from a family wedding, that it really hit me. We were in bed, her back turned to me as usual, a book in her hands that she never seemed to finish. I reached out to touch her arm, trying to bridge the gap I felt widening between us. "Linda," I whispered, "what's going on?" She froze for a moment, and I could hear the slight tremor in her breath. "Nothing," she said, her voice distant. "Just tired, that's all." But it wasn't just tiredness. I knew her too well. We had been through enough together for me to recognize when something wasn't right. And this wasn't right. A few days later, I found myself lying awake at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, thinking, maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe the stress from work had gotten to both of us. Maybe she was just going through something personal that she didn't want to share. The thought crossed my mind that I was overthinking, that I was reading into things that didn't matter. I tried to push the doubts away, but they lingered like a shadow. The next morning, I tried to address it again, more directly this time. "Linda, is everything okay between us? You seem distant." She paused, her eyes not meeting mine. She took a long breath before replying, "I'm fine, Andrew. Really." That was the first time I felt something in my gut twist. There was something off about the way she said it. A hesitation. But I brushed it off, telling myself that everything would be fine, that it was just a phase. But it wasn't just a phase. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet understand. And I didn't want to face it, but deep down, I knew something had changed. Something was wrong. The first real sign that something had shifted in our relationship came on a Tuesday night, 2 weeks after that conversation in bed. Linda had always been meticulous with her phone, never a moment where it wasn't close by. But recently, I began noticing something strange. She was keeping it closer than usual, almost protective of it. She'd take it to the bathroom with her, and I'd catch her glancing at it while we ate dinner together, as if it held a secret only she needed to know. At first, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. But when she started turning it face down whenever it was beside her, I couldn't ignore the knot that began to form in my stomach. It was subtle, sure. But for me, it was a change that shouldn't have gone unnoticed. Linda had always been transparent with me. There were no secrets, no hidden corners in our relationship. We'd always shared everything. And this felt like a wall was slowly going up between us. I tried not to let it get to me, but something about it gnawed at me. It was the kind of gut feeling you can't shake, no matter how hard you try to ignore it. One evening, she was late getting home from work again. I had already prepared dinner, as I always did, and when she walked through the door, the tiredness on her face wasn't just from a long day at the office. It was something deeper, something that told me she was tired in a way that went beyond the physical. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "How was your day?" "Busy," she replied, her voice absent, and she quickly went to the bathroom without further explanation. She was distant, far more distant than usual. I cleaned up the dinner dishes and sat on the couch, trying to give her space, trying not to let my thoughts spiral. But then I remembered the phone. Her phone, sitting on the kitchen counter, charging. I didn't plan to snoop, I told myself I wouldn't, but my fingers moved without permission. I told myself I'd only look for a moment, to ease my growing suspicion. I picked it up, and my heart raced in my chest. Messages. There were several text threads open, but what caught my eye was the one with an unfamiliar number. The messages were brief but intimate, filled with heart emojis and declarations like, "I miss you," and "I can't wait to see you again." My hands shook as I read them. Who was this person? Why was Linda hiding this from me? I put the phone back down quickly, my stomach in knots. I didn't know if I had enough courage to confront her just yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I wasn't sure what I was about to discover, but I knew I couldn't live in the dark anymore. Linda emerged from the bathroom a few minutes later. She caught me staring at the phone. "What's wrong?" she asked, a little too quickly. "Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's this person?" Her eyes flickered. A flash of something, guilt, flashed in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a tight smile. "It's just a work friend, Andrew. Nothing to worry about." But her voice didn't have the same confidence it once did. There was something there. Something in the way she said it that made my heart pound with a mix of dread and anger. I wanted to press further, but instead, I nodded and stood up. "All right." My voice was calm, but inside, everything was unraveling. As I went to bed that night, Linda's side of the bed remained untouched, a cold space between us. I didn't sleep much. All I could think about were those messages. They haunted me. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The trust I'd built with Linda had begun to crack. I wasn't sure how much longer it would hold, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the truth. The next few days were a blur of tense silences and half-hearted conversations. Every time I looked at Linda, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. The phone, the secrecy, the way she would quickly change the subject when I tried to ask her about it. It all weighed on me like a heavy stone lodged deep in my chest. I tried to push the thoughts aside, to tell myself that maybe I was just overreacting. But when we sat down for dinner that Wednesday night, it became impossible to ignore. Linda, sitting across from me, barely looked up from her plate. Her eyes were glazed, her fork moving mechanically between her food and her mouth, as if she was on autopilot. She wasn't really there. She was somewhere else. "So, how's the project going?" I asked, trying to break the silence. She shrugged without answering, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "It's fine, just busy." She said the word like she was reading it off a script. I felt my heart tighten. This wasn't the Linda I knew. Where had the spark gone? The conversations we used to have, the plans we would make for the weekend, the deep talks into the night, they were becoming distant memories, buried beneath a fog of uncertainty and distance. That's when I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers, no matter how painful they might be. Later that night, as Linda headed to the bathroom, I noticed her phone once again resting on the kitchen counter. It was charging, the screen still glowing faintly in the dim light. My hand moved almost on instinct, trembling as I reached for it. I told myself I wouldn't do this, but the doubt had taken root, and there was no turning back now. I opened the text thread with the unfamiliar number. My heart raced as I scrolled through the messages. More than I'd seen before. "Can't stop thinking about you," one message said. "I'm counting the days until I see you again." My fingers shook as I read every word. My worst fear was coming true. This wasn't a work colleague, not by a long shot. The affection, the intimacy, the urgency in the words, it was a relationship. A secret one. And my wife, the woman I thought I knew so well, was in the middle of it. I didn't know what to feel anymore. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. But more than anything, I felt like I had been living in a lie. All the moments, all the years together suddenly felt hollow. I quickly put the phone down and walked away, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were clammy, my mind in a whirlwind. I couldn't sit on this any longer. I needed to confront her. But how? How could I even begin to process what I had just discovered? When Linda came out of the bathroom, I didn't wait. I turned to her, my voice firm despite the knots in my stomach. Who is he, Linda? The question was simple, but the weight of it felt like 1,000 pounds. She froze, her body stiffening as her eyes met mine. There was a long pause, a moment of silence that stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then she slowly exhaled, her shoulders sagging. He's someone I met, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone from work. I felt the blood rush to my ears, my pulse hammering in my chest. That's a lie, Linda. I've seen the messages. I know what's going on. Her face faltered, her expression shifting from guilt to something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Fear? Maybe both. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words got stuck. I'm so sorry, Andrew, she finally said, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand an explanation. But instead, I felt this hollow emptiness take over. This wasn't the woman I married. The woman I married wouldn't have lied to me, wouldn't have let this happen. I stood up from the table, pacing back and forth as anger bubbled up inside me. How long, Linda? How long have you been seeing him? A few months, she said quietly, her eyes downcast. It started when I went on that business trip in October. A few months. The words echoed in my mind, slicing through the quiet of the room. For months, I had been living with someone who was lying to me. Someone who was sharing pieces of herself with another man, and I had been completely blind to it. The silence between us was deafening. I could feel my chest tightening, my vision blurring with tears I didn't want to shed. But I couldn't stop them. The weight of the betrayal, the years of trust that had crumbled in front of me, were too much to bear. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix this. Linda reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to touch my arm. Please, Andrew. I never meant to hurt you. But I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could hear were the words in the text messages, the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The days after that confrontation felt like a blur. Long stretches of silence, punctuated by moments of raw anger and bitter confusion. Linda was apologetic, remorseful, and in some ways seemed genuinely regretful for the pain she had caused. But every apology felt like salt in the wound. She was sorry. She was deeply sorry. But the truth was, I couldn't just forgive her. Not yet. I couldn't even bring myself to look at her without feeling like the ground beneath me was crumbling. My mind was flooded with 1,000 questions, none of which I was sure I wanted answers to. How had this happened? Had I really been blind to the signs? How could she lie to me for months? But the worst question, the one that kept me up at night, was why? I needed to know. I needed to understand how the woman I loved could fall for someone else. Someone from another country. Someone who wasn't even part of our lives. It didn't make sense. It didn't fit with the woman I thought I knew. But more than anything, I needed answers for myself. Answers that might help me understand whether or not there was anything left worth saving. So, I did something I never thought I would. I asked her to tell me everything. Linda had always been open with me in the past, so when I requested the truth, I expected honesty. She was reluctant at first, but after a few moments of silence, she sat across from me and finally spoke. I met him on a business trip, she began, her voice low and hesitant. It was supposed to be a quick thing, just a few meetings with some clients. But we started talking and, I don't know, it just felt easy. We connected. At first, it wasn't anything, but over time, it became more. I felt my chest tighten as she spoke. She hadn't just slept with him. She had formed an emotional connection with him that hurt more than anything else. The physical betrayal, while devastating, was easier to process than the emotional abandonment. Linda continued, her words stumbling over each other. He's from Italy. We talked online for a while after the trip, and we eventually met up again in person. That's when it escalated. It wasn't just sex, Andrew. It was more. We talked about everything. He made me feel seen. Something I didn't feel here. I felt like I was being suffocated. My hands clenched into fists, but I kept my voice steady. So all those late nights? The secretive phone calls? That was him? All that time you were talking to him, planning to see him again, and you never thought to tell me? To talk to me about it. She looked down, tears welling up in her eyes. I thought about it. I really did. But I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could stop it, but by then, I was already too far in. I didn't know how to pull back without hurting you. I sat there, processing the words she had just spoken. This wasn't just a one-night mistake or a drunken slip-up. This was a full-fledged affair, emotional and physical. She had let herself fall for someone else, someone who made her feel something she didn't feel with me anymore. And that hurt more than I could put into words. But there was something else gnawing at me, something that had been buried beneath the anger. How much of this was my fault? Was I to blame for Linda's unhappiness? Had I not been attentive enough? Not listened closely enough when she needed me? She had said she didn't feel seen, but I thought I had been there for her. I thought we were in this together. I never wanted to hurt you, Andrew, Linda said softly, her voice breaking. I don't know how it happened. I felt so distant from you. And then, when I met Luca, it was like he saw me. Really saw me. Her words were a cold slap. Luca. His name echoed in my head, making my stomach twist. I hated him. I hated him for doing this to us. But the truth was, I hated Linda, too, for the lies, for the betrayal. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I stood up, pacing back and forth, the weight of her confession crushing me from all sides. How am I supposed to move forward? How am I supposed to look at you the same way? Linda's eyes were filled with tears now, and she reached for my arm. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Andrew. I don't even know if you ever will. But please, I love you. I didn't want this. I want to fix things, but I need your help. Her words hung in the air, but they felt hollow. She loved me? Then why did she let this happen? I pulled away from her, feeling more lost than ever. Love. It didn't feel like love anymore. Felt like a lie. I couldn't be in the same room with her. I couldn't bear to hear her voice, to look at the face of the woman who had shattered everything. I don't know what to do, Linda. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving her standing there, crying. The door slammed behind me, and I stepped out into the cold night, the weight of the world pressing down on me. The next few days passed in a haze of confusion and heartbreak. My thoughts were tangled in a web of anger, disbelief, and shame. I had spent so long trusting Linda, believing that our marriage was the one constant in my life, and now it felt like I was standing on the edge of an abyss, with no clear way back. I couldn't stay at the house. I just couldn't. The very air in that place felt suffocating, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. So I left. I spent nights at a friend's place, staying out as late as I could, trying to avoid facing the harsh reality of what had become of my life. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape the questions that gnawed at me. Was it over? Was there a chance to rebuild what we had? Or was this the end of everything? A betrayal too deep to heal? I didn't know how to fix this. Linda had broken my trust in a way that felt irreparable. Yet, part of me still wanted to hold on. I wasn't ready to give up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the one being strung along. That somehow, Linda was still holding on to whatever she had with Luca, even as she begged for my forgiveness. The more I thought about it, the more desperate I became to know the truth. I needed answers, answers that didn't come from Linda's tearful pleas or her promises of change. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I couldn't get Luca out of my head. He was the one who had taken my wife from me, the one who had wormed his way into her heart, replacing me with someone else. And as much as I wanted to hate him, a part of me wanted to know who he was, to understand what made him so different from me. What had he offered that I couldn't? So, I did something I never thought I would. I booked a flight to Italy. Felt insane. The idea of flying halfway across the world just to confront a man I'd never met seemed like something out of a bad thriller. But the thought of not knowing, of being left in the dark while Linda continued to hide her affair behind layers of excuses, was more unbearable than anything else. I didn't tell Linda. She knew I was upset, but she didn't know the extent of my plan. I was determined to get answers, even if it meant facing the man who had stolen my wife's heart. I needed to confront him, to hear from him exactly how my wife had fallen in love with him, and why. As the flight took off, my mind raced. I knew I was doing something dangerous, something that could end badly. What if Linda found out? What if she found a way to make things work with Luca, even as I tried to piece together the wreckage of our marriage? But deep down, I knew I couldn't sit idly by. I had to know what had happened to us. I had to understand the other side of the story. The plane ride felt like a blur. I spent most of it thinking, trying to convince myself that this was the right thing to do. But the closer I got to Italy, the more the reality of it all set in. Was I ready for this? Was I really prepared to confront the person who had, in a sense, stolen my life? The flight landed with a jolt, and I felt like I had stepped into a dream. The world outside the plane window was so different, so unfamiliar, that it felt almost unreal. And yet, the weight in my chest remained, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how Luca would react to my presence or what I would say to him. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't leaving Italy without answers. I stepped off the plane, feeling the unfamiliar warmth of the Italian air hit my face. It was strange, this place so distant from home, and yet, my heart was pounding as though I were still standing in my own living room, facing Linda. The flight had been long, and the reality of what I was about to do settled heavily on my shoulders. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew I couldn't leave without the truth. I rented a car and followed the directions I'd pulled up on my phone. The address I had was a little nondescript, just a small apartment in a residential area of Milan. It didn't seem like much, a far cry from the life Linda and I had built together. But somehow that made everything more real. He wasn't some fantasy. He was a man with a real life, and he had taken my wife from me, bit by bit, without me even knowing. As I drove through the narrow streets, I felt a surge of anger and desperation. I couldn't help but wonder if Linda was at home, waiting for me to come back, or if she was still in contact with him. The thought of them together made my stomach churn. Finally, I parked near the building, a modest structure, the kind of place you wouldn't expect a love affair to bloom. My palms were sweaty as I stood in front of the door. I wasn't sure what I was going to say when he opened it. Would he be surprised? Would he be smug, knowing that he had taken something precious from me? I rang the doorbell. The sound of the chime echoed in the hallway, and I held my breath, waiting. My heart was pounding in my chest. I hadn't expected to feel so nervous, but standing there now, I couldn't shake the sense that I was about to walk into a confrontation that would change everything. A moment later, the door swung open, and there he was, Luca. He was tall, dark-haired, with sharp features that made him look like he had just stepped out of a movie. He had a quiet confidence about him that irritated me instantly. He was the kind of man who could charm the world, and it infuriated me to think that Linda had fallen for him. His eyes widened slightly when he saw me standing there, but he quickly masked the surprise with a small, controlled smile. "Can I help you?" he asked, his accent thick but clear. I stood there for a long moment, unsure how to begin. I had imagined this confrontation so many times, but now that the moment was here, I felt all the words freeze in my throat. "Are you Luca?" I finally managed to ask, my voice low but steady. "Yes, I am," he said, his smile fading slightly as he sized me up. "Who are you?" I swallowed hard, feeling a mix of dread and rage swelling inside me. "I'm Andrew. I'm married to Linda." The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. I could see the realization hit him. He knew exactly who I was, but I didn't care. I didn't care what he thought or how he tried to downplay everything. I needed him to understand that I wasn't here for pleasantries. "You've been seeing my wife," I said, my voice stronger now. "For months." Luca didn't flinch. Instead, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair, as if preparing for this conversation. "I see," he said slowly. "You must be angry." "Angry," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "You think." "I'm sorry you're hurt," Luca said, his tone unbothered. but with a hint of sincerity. But Linda and I have been involved. I never wanted to hurt you, but we both what? I cut him off, my fists clenched at my sides. You're the one who pursued my wife. You're the one who took her away from me. So don't sit here and pretend like this was some mutual decision. He paused, clearly calculating how best to respond. Andrew, he said, his voice much softer now. I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just saying that Linda and we have something real. I understand this is hard for you, but we love each other. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. They love each other. It was a truth I had been avoiding for so long, but hearing it from Luca's mouth made it undeniable. I wanted to scream, to shout, to ask how this could have happened, but I stayed silent, feeling the weight of it all crash down on me. I'm not here for your apology, Luca, I said finally, my voice cold. I'm not even sure why I'm here, but I needed to see you. I needed to know the truth. And now I do. Luca looked at me, his eyes softening for a moment. I didn't want to hurt you, Andrew. I didn't. But I'm not going to apologize for loving her. The words cut deeper than anything he could have said. I had been blind. I had been so focused on saving my marriage, on holding on to something that was slipping away, that I hadn't even seen the truth staring me in the face. I don't know what's going to happen now, I said, my voice wavering despite myself. But I won't stand in the way of your relationship with Linda. If that's what she wants, then I have to let go. I turned to leave, the weight of the conversation sinking in. As I walked down the hallway, I could feel the pieces of my world shattering around me. I wasn't sure what came next, or if there was any chance of salvaging anything. But one thing was clear. I couldn't continue pretending that everything would go back to the way it was. I had gotten my answers, but they only brought more pain. I returned home, but nothing felt the same. The apartment, once a place of shared memories, felt hollow. I had flown halfway across the world to get answers, and what I found shattered the illusions I had built up about my marriage, about Linda, about everything. The confrontation with Luca had been everything I expected and nothing like I thought it would be. He hadn't begged for forgiveness, he hadn't even looked guilty. Instead, he had stood there, as if he were explaining a perfectly normal situation. And in his eyes, I could see that he truly believed that Linda was his, that she had chosen him. In some ways, I almost envied the calmness in his demeanor. At least he knew where he stood. But I didn't. I didn't know what to do next. Should I even try to salvage this? Was there any point in attempting to rebuild a marriage with someone who had willingly given her love to another man? For days, I couldn't bring myself to talk to Linda. I stayed away, leaving her multiple texts, but they all went unanswered. Each message felt like a plea for something, reassurance, explanation, closure. But deep down, I knew that no amount of words could fix what had been broken. Then, on the 5th day after my return, Linda reached out. It was late in the evening when I saw her name on the phone screen. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face her yet. But I knew that I couldn't keep running from this. I had to hear her side, even if it felt like a knife to the heart. I picked up. Andrew, please, we need to talk, Linda said, her voice trembling. I didn't respond immediately. The anger still lingered, simmering under the surface. But her voice, that small crack in her tone, made me realize that she was just as lost as I was. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Linda, I said quietly. I don't know if I can keep pretending everything is okay. You've broken something inside me, something I don't know how to fix. She was silent for a long time. Then finally she spoke. I know, she said, her voice raw. I've been thinking about everything, Andrew. About us, about what I did, and I don't know what I was thinking. I was so unhappy, and I let myself get lost. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. But I don't want to lose you. I love you, and I want to make it right. Her words stung, because deep down, I knew the truth. She had loved someone else, and no amount of regret would ever erase that. I didn't want to hear her say she loved me, because it felt like a consolation prize. It felt like she was saying what I wanted to hear, not the truth. Do you love him? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Linda paused. I thought I did. But when I saw you after the confrontation, when I saw the hurt in your eyes, I realized that I've been running away from what we had. From you. I never stopped loving you, Andrew, but I lost myself in the process. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can. I felt the walls closing in around me. It was as if she were still trying to hold on to both worlds. She was caught between the man she had given her heart to and the man she had promised to love forever. And I didn't know where I fit in that equation anymore. The pain was almost unbearable. I wanted to shout, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how her betrayal had shaken me to the core. But I knew that wouldn't help either of us. Maybe we need time apart, I suggested, the words feeling foreign coming from my mouth. Linda's breath hitched. You mean, you want to leave me? I don't know, Linda, I whispered. I don't know what I want anymore. But I can't keep living in the shadow of what you did. I need time to figure this out, to figure myself out. I'll do whatever it takes, Andrew. Please, don't walk away from us. But her plea, as sincere as it sounded, wasn't enough to erase the distance between us. The truth was, I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. The lies, the secrets. How could I live with them? How could I move forward when all I could see was her with him, in a life that I wasn't a part of? I need time to think, I repeated, the weight of it all pressing on me like a vice. We both do. And with that, I ended the call. I spent the next few days in a haze trying to figure out what to do. I had come to the realization that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep holding on to a life that no longer existed. As much as I loved Linda, as much as I wanted things to go back to the way they were, I knew that wasn't possible anymore. We had both changed. She had changed. The question now was, could I ever forgive her? Could I ever rebuild my trust in her? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in a relationship where doubt and pain had replaced love. I had to take control of my own happiness, no matter how much it hurt. And so I started looking forward. It wasn't easy. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scar of betrayal would never completely fade. But in the end, I had to ask myself, could I move on, or was I going to spend the rest of my life stuck in the past? For the first time in a long while, I didn't have the answers, but I knew I had to find them, whether I did it alone or with Linda by my side. The choice was mine. If you've enjoyed this gripping journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and the raw emotions that come with it, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this story. And if you're hungry for more captivating tales, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for being part of our community, and remember, you're never alone in your journey.